Anu, and the famed Mesopotamian sky god who's given the Anunnaki pantheon such notoriety in modern times, has a history that reads like a science fiction movie. Many now believe the Greek pantheon is just a rendition of the older Mesopotamian pantheon, with Anu at the helm. It wasn't until much later that Anu was viewed as the father of the gods and ruler of the heavens. His position as ruler of the heavens passed to his firstborn Enlil with dire consequences, and it's where we get a lot of history from. Anu is the son of Anshar and Kishar, literally meaning heaven and earth, who in turn were the second born of the primordial couple Apsu and Tiamat at the beginning of the world. Scholars don't know what to make of the ruler of the heavens being a second-born. It doesn't sound like an all-supreme being, sounding more like a European royal dynasty. He was originally a Sumerian sky deity known as An, which translates as sky. The Akkadians later adopt him circa 2375 BC as Anu, heaven, the almighty, all-powerful. Sargon the Great of Akkad, 2334 through 2279 BCE, speaks of Anu and Inanna in his writings, mostly as legitimizing his rule or assisting him in the conquest. As so many people revered Anu, you cannot understand anything about the Anunnaki or the Sumerian pantheon without understanding him, and of course his offspring. Anu is most often represented in symbolism simply by a crown or crown on a throne. This iconography symbolizes the status as king of the gods, an honor and responsibility later conferred upon Enlil, Marduk, son of Enki and Ea, the god of wisdom, and Assur of the Assyrians, all of which were profoundly elevated by Anu and thus associated with him. His consort is Antu, also known as Uras, goddess of the earth, and they produce many offspring, which are more commonly known as the Anunnaki. Lesser known is their offspring, the Utuki, which permeate the entire Mesopotamian mythology. The impact of the Anunnaki and Utuki is vast and complex, affecting most ancient religions and tying in with so many ancient civilizations. Although Anu is not featured prominently in many myths, he's often mentioned as a background figure. This is because as veneration of the god progressed, he became more and more distant. Anu, the sky god, was one of the many younger gods born of Apsu and Tiamat, gradually becoming the lord of the heavens above. He was the god who maintained all aspects of existence. Alongside Enlil and Enki, Anu formed a trio which ruled the heavens, earth, and underworld in one version, or in another, heaven, the sky, and the earth. Anu rarely makes an appearance as the main character in mythology, but when he's mentioned, it's always a significant role. The Enuma Elish and Anu, the sky god. The Babylonian epic of creation, more famously known as Enuma Elish, circa 1100 BCE, is the epic regarding of birth of the gods and the formation of the world and subsequently human beings. Initially, there was only the swirling waters of chaos, which divided into a male principle, Apsu, symbolized by fresh water, and a female principle, Tiamat, salt water. These two deities gave birth to Lamu and Lahamu, known as protective deities, and Anshar and Kishar, who sired the younger gods. Anu belongs to this younger group, and it's in this epic we get his backstory, or place in origins of it all. This group is problematic and has little to do, and so amuse themselves in various ways which come to anger Apsu. He cannot sleep at night for the noise, and they distract him during the day. He eventually decides, after conferring with his vizier, that he must destroy them. Although the epic of creation focuses Tiamat and creation, we get an amazing backdrop to Anu's place in the world. Tiamat overhears her husband's deliberation and warns her grandson Enki of the peril. After pondering all his options carefully, Enki puts Apsu into a deep sleep and slays him. Tiamat is shocked and disowns all the younger gods. She quickly assembles an army of monsters to eliminate them. The two armies thus clash, and the younger gods are defeated and retreat again and again. At this difficult position, Anu tries diplomacy with Tiamat and tries to resolve the problem. The younger gods seem to have every faith in Anu's ability, but when Anu faces Tiamat, he falls apart and returns to the others to report his failure in the mission. Anu's diplomatic failure, nonetheless, contributes to the younger gods' ultimate victory. The gods were so confident of Anu's success, and when their hope was disappointed, they come to realize they must change their habits. The old paradigm must go, and they must accept change or find a new way of attaining their goal. Marduk, the son of Enki, comes forward to offer himself as their savior only if they will elect him their king. Marduk defeats the champion of Tiamat and slays her, but he would not have risen to the challenge if Anu had not failed in his diplomacy. Anu then ushers in the new era, which allows for the ultimate victory of the gods. Once peace has been reestablished, Marduk and his father set about the business of creation and the world, and subsequently human beings are established. The Enuma Elish is sometimes called the 7 tablets of creation. The many versions always describe the creation of human beings from a Mesopotamian perspective. The story was found on multiple tablets that dated back to approximately 1100 BCE, although indications show that the stories themselves existed much earlier than that. Archaeologists discovered them at the Nineveh libraries. Although the creation myth follows the same basic path, no matter which part of Mesopotamia it comes from, the names of the gods and other players differ, whether the precise recording was from Babylon or Sumer. The copies discovered and well-researched come from Babylon, which makes Marduk, who is considered the patron god of that civilization, one of the important characters in the story. If a Sumerian copy was found, for example, he may not have been mentioned quite as much. The Enuma Elish is the best depiction we have of the dynamic interactions of the Enki versus Enlil saga. It tells the story of how Enki and Enlil, the divine brothers, who first decided to create humankind as a labor force or servant class. It also deals with how the gods came to be, the creation of the universe and the world, and every other detail that any classic creation myth would include. The creation of everything. This Babylonian creation myth is often considered the oldest story that exists in the entire world. It tells a tale of creation that's echoed through the millennia, even religions still practice in this current time. In the beginning, there was nothing but a fast swirl of water flowing through chaotic nothingness. The first thing that happened was that salt water, characterized by Tiamat, the dragon goddess, and fresh water, characterized by the god Apsu, divided. As soon as they split apart, they came back together again to become the parents of additional gods. Apsu apparently enjoyed sleeping peacefully and found that younger gods were too noisy and boisterous, decided to eliminate them all. Tiamat warns Enki, their eldest son, who lulls his father to sleep and eliminates him instead. Tiamat, who did not expect this type of outcome, gets very angry with the younger gods and begins a battle against them. She hands over the tablets of destiny to her top advisor, Kingu, who champions her in battle. She also creates monsters to attack her sons and other rebellious gods. Finally, Marduk shows up, bargains for ultimate power if he stops Kingu and Tiamat, and ends up defeating both. The story goes that he shot the dragon goddess with an arrow, and when she cried out in pain, her tears formed the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her body becomes the earth and heaven surrounding it. When the conflict is over, Marduk enslaves the 11 monsters, directs various younger gods to take care of certain responsibilities, and seizes the tablets of destiny for himself. As a final act of payback, Marduk and the high god Ea, Enki, decide to create humankind from Kingu's body and clay of the earth. Parallels with Judeo-Christian stories. As may seem obvious, the creation myth influenced the Judeo-Christian one to some degree. Hebrew scribes used the concept of a void without form and a god that created the earth, waters, heavens, and finally humankind in turn. When Mesopotamian archaeology increased in the 19th century, historians quickly discovered that the book of Genesis was not the oldest creation story in existence. Other biblical stories such as Noah and the flood and the fall of man existed in Mesopotamian times too. They first appeared in Sumer, were translated into ancient Babylonian, transferred to the Assyrians, and finally fell into the hands of Hebrews. The passage of folklore through time and across locations has long been common events throughout history. Of course, many differences exist between the story of a dragon queen and the blood of a conquered god, and the tales told of the monolithic God in the Bible. Enuma Elish describes many different aspects of the creation tale that did not make their way into the story shared by the Hebrews. They edited heavily. They focused on just one all-powerful God that created everything out of a chaotic universe. This parallels Marduk most of all, especially when it comes to the expectations of humankind to worship and thank the gods for their gift of life. The priesthood of Marduk. In the mid-1700s BCE, the people of Babylon turned to Marduk more and more as their reference for worship and religious practices. Prior to this, they'd focused on the goddess Inanna. This heralded in a time of gods replacing goddesses as some of the most prominent deities of the time. As Babylon got stronger, they believed that aligning themselves with the most powerful god would help their future. The priesthood of Marduk expanded as political and economic power grew in Babylon. As times change, so do stories. Eventually, the creation myth began to push the idea that Marduk was the only king, and any of the other named deities existed only as parts of him. To celebrate the new year and Marduk in general, many people would read from the Enuma Elish, sing songs of praise, and glorify a statue of this god, and enshrine him in a special small house or temple. Among the first humans created are those skilled in wisdom, and one of the very adept is Adapa. The myth of Adapa and the meeting with Anu. The myth of Adapa, 14th century BCE, tells the amazing story of the first man. A creation of Enki, he was bestowed with Enki's wisdom. Although Enki adores his creation, he admits that he cannot give him everything, otherwise he would be a god, and so he holds back on immortality. Adapa has wisdom as his main trait, but with this wisdom he understands he will die one day, and nothing he can do can change that. Content with what he has and his priestly duties at Eridu in Enki's temple, he hunts and fishes and amuses himself. This is the backdrop to what has become known as the myth of Adapa, which many have now recognized is the exact same theoretically as the Adam and Eve scenario. The Adapa story is so central to Mesopotamian mythology, and the religion, its oldest copy, was mysteriously found as far as Akhenaton's city of Amarna in Egypt. The myth of Adapa and the food of life. Alongside all the other ancient stories of gods, goddesses, and humans comes the myth of Adapa, which tells of the fall of man and their existence as mortal beings. The first human ever created by Ea was named Adapa. This god of wisdom shares his gift with the man, which makes him intelligent and mentally sharp. Another major god, Anu, offers the gift of immortality, but Ea manipulates Adapa to decline. This story, from long before the Judeo-Christian Bible was created, has some direct influence on the story of Adam and Eve. They lost their place in the Garden of Eden because they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Adapa, who also received wisdom, although as a gift instead of a discretion, was refused immortality, just as Adam and Eve were forced to abandon their perfect home and continue their lives as mortal humans. The problem with both Adam and Eve and the myth of Adapa was the assumed competition between the humans and the gods. Yahweh did not want his creations to be equal to him. Ea also did not appreciate the idea that Adapa would have all the benefits of godhood too. This myth is a story about keeping mortals in their place and maintaining control of power. The main character in this story is a king named Adapa, who comes from Eridu city. On a fishing trip, a strong gust blew up and knocked him overboard into the ocean. Enraged at losing his boat and getting all wet, he battled against the south wind and broke its wing. The wind, which needed to recuperate for 7 full days, was not able to create any air movement during that time. Anu, the god of the sky, got quite angry and demanded that Adapa give him an explanation. Before appearing in front of Anu, Ea tells the man what to say and gave some tips on proper behavior when visiting the god's domain. Ea leads Adapa astray with bad information, however, because he doesn't want to risk the king getting a hold of the food of life that would grant him immortality. Ea suspects that Anu will offer these things to the man, and he can't let that happen. The instructions he gives to the mortal visitor are all wrong. The first bit of information refers to a pair of guardians named Gishida and Tammuz. Ea suggests that they are more likely to let him pass if he offers them compliments and says he knows them well. Then he should meet with Anu and refuse food and drink because, as Ea falsely reveals, it would seriously harm him instantly. This high god convinces Adapa that the sky god is quite angry about the wind and will punish him quite severely. Ea does suggest that any clothing or oil given to him would be perfectly okay to accept. This way, he will not offend the sky god again. The whole group of instructions was nothing but lies and misdirections. However, Adapa follows all of Ea's directions, refuses the gift of immortality that he would have gotten from the food of life, and returns to Earth to live out the rest of his days. Unfortunately, the last tablet that tells the story has been broken over the centuries and makes it difficult to understand the ending. This leaves the myth of Adapa open to some interpretation. While many researchers agree that Ea wanted to trick the king into not accepting the immortality, others say that Ea's caution was quite sincere. He may have genuinely believed that Anu would punish the man for breaking the wind's wing. Logically, it makes sense that someone who attacked the wind would not receive gifts from the sky god. The more serious possibility does not seem to align with Anu's request that Adapa come for a visit and offer an explanation. The story does not seem particularly volatile or violent in any way. When taken with the understanding of the prideful god and the folklore that trickled down to civilizations after Mesopotamia, the original description seems to make more sense. Also, story includes the line, "Why has Ea revealed to impure mankind the heart of heaven and earth?" That demonstrates Anu's willingness to award Adapa and wonderment about why Ea would act against it. The puzzlement he demonstrates when the king refuses the gift does not seem to align with any nefarious plans or revenge opportunities. The myth of Adapa and the food of life originated in Babylon during the years when the Kassite tribe controlled the area. This was in the 1400s BCE. Various iterations of this general story passed down through the years and traveled around the area of the Persian Gulf. For example, a writer named Berosus shared a similar tale around 300 BCE about a demigod named Oannes, who lived as a half man and half fish. Some parts of the story are quite similar to the much older Adapa tale, especially in the fact that the main character was quite wise and shared his wisdom with surrounding people. It seems that the gods and goddesses in many cultural and religious histories created humankind as compatriots and near equals. However, when push came to shove, the deities grew fearful or arrogant enough to deny the people godlike immortality. Enki understands that human beings cannot be like the gods because that would upset the natural order. Adapa must remain mortal, must stay in his place, for creation and function as it should be. In another story, the Atrasis, as you're about to see, is established that humans are created with limited lifespans by the will of the gods. In offering immortality to Adapa, Anu is upsetting the natural order, but he makes the offer because of his compassion. He feels it's a disservice to Adapa to have them wise enough to recognize his mortality, but unable to do anything to escape death. This compassion and understanding are characteristic of Anu, as he was seen in Enuma Elish, where he tries to bring peace through diplomatic negotiation instead of continued war. The Atrasis Epic, a tale of the Great Flood. In a story that predates the Judeo-Christian testaments, the Babylonian civilization shared a dramatic tale of a massive flood delivered by the gods, with the intention to kill all humans and other life on Earth. The later biblical tale of Noah and the Ark follows the plot quite specifically. In the story of Atrasis, A man by that name received a warning from the gods to build a gigantic boat for himself, his family, and animals that lived on the land. Following the gods' directions, this man toiled to construct the vessel, gathered together the people and animals as requested, and climbed aboard to weather the massive storm. The so-called Atrasis epic was found to come from around 1645 to 1626 BCE. During these years, King Hammurabi's great-grandson ruled in Babylon. His name was Ammi-Saduqa. Even at that time, the story was well known and considered a legend of the day. Prior to these dates, all legends and tales would have been spoken and not written down. There's considerable evidence that this Babylonian flood story had made the rounds for quite some time before it was ever recorded. Sumer had its own version of the flood story. It was called Eridu Genesis and hailed from a time even before Atrasis lived. The first recorded instance of this was in the early years of the 17th century BCE. If you travel back even further in time, you find a report of a massive flood somewhere around 2100 to 1500 BCE. In one of the earliest stories ever recorded, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The fact that this flood story touched so many different cultures over hundreds of years seems to indicate that the event actually happened. In fact, the chance of a worldwide flood so terrifying that it destroyed life on Earth as we know it is so slim as to be unbelievable. However, the Mesopotamian, Sumerian, and Babylonian civilizations all existed in and around the Fertile Crescent. This part of the ancient world was neatly tucked between the Tigris and Euphrates River. There's no doubt that if both of these flooded, it would seem like a worldwide disaster to the people of the time. In truth, flooded rivers are not all that odd. There's archaeological evidence that clearly indicates the people living in that region had to deal with floods on a relatively regular basis. These natural disasters may have continued to fuel the story of the Great Flood through the generations. Whenever someone suggests that the floods were actually more widespread, especially in conjunction with the biblical Noah's flood, geologists and other scientists are quick to step up and mention that there's no genuine evidence of flooding that spread far beyond the Mesopotamian valley. The stories themselves follow the same basic structure. It all started with the gods creating humankind to help them do the work of keeping the earth running as necessary. In these ancient cultures, different tiers of gods existed. The older ones were generally more powerful and could make the younger, weaker ones do tasks for them. When the young gods got fed up with all that heavy toil, a few of the older deities got together and created 14 people equally split between male and female. Unlike the latter Judeo-Christian stories, in which God created just one man and one woman, it seemed the Mesopotamians thought it more appropriate to start off with a larger community of helpers for the gods. Finally, the gods could relax and leave all the heavy lifting to the people who lived on the ground. Unfortunately, the people procreated too quickly and ended up being noisy and annoying. This led the top god Enlil to attempt to reduce their numbers, first with a drought, famine, and pestilence, and finally a massive flood. One of the chief architects of humanity, a god named Enki, took pity on the wise one, Atrasis, and tipped him off of the impending doom. The details about how Atrasis and subsequently Noah survived on the ark for so long with all those animals on board are dim at best. Most of these morality tales involve more pointed meaning than explanations. Intricate descriptions of the storms and the reactions of the gods and goddesses filled the time between the first raindrop and the final deliverance of the saved humans and animals. Many of the gods and goddesses considered the flood to be a bad idea and mourned the loss of their human creations. Enlil is both angry at Enki for saving Atrasis and sorrowful that everyone else died. After quite a bit of discussion, the deities agreed that they'll just make people who cannot create offspring quite so fast, infertile women, dedicated virgins, and demons who will steal babies. The legendary descriptions of these final got the decisions undoubtedly explained away some of the natural phenomenon associated with low infant mortality and infertility in general. In those early days, most suffering ended up with more profound meaning than simple biology. The Epic of Atrasis and all the subsequent flood stories were created for the same reason that many ancient tales came to be: First, it offered an explanation for some of the natural phenomenon and human problems that the people in those long-ago civilizations dealt with. Second, a moral warning for people to behave in a manner their gods and goddesses desired for them. Finally, they promoted faith and understanding in the face of difficult times. Perhaps these reasons are why the epic tale of a massive flood sent by the gods has reverberated throughout history from the earliest days of civilization onward. Anu, the highest god of all gods. Anu's benevolence infused the other gods as he himself withdrew higher and higher into the heavens. He was finally seen as the master creator behind all the workings of the universe, but distanced from both humanity and the other gods. The only deity who had access to Anu was his son, Enlil, who gradually took on his father's characteristics and power. Even after Enlil became more popular, however, Anu continued to be venerated throughout the country. In the city of Uruk, where Inanna was the patron deity, Anu was honored by a large temple which continued in operation from circa 2000 BCE to circa 150 BCE, and served as an astronomical observation and library. A hymn to Anu from early in this period illustrates the high regard he was accorded. The hymn reads, in part, "O Prince of the gods, whose utterance ruleth over the obedient company of the gods, Lord of the horned crown, which is marvelously splendid, thou travellest hither and thither on the raging storm. Thou standest in the royal company to be admired as a king. At thy word of the gods cast themselves on the ground in a body like a reed on the stream. They command blows like the wind, and causes food and drink to thrive. At the word the angry gods turn back to their habitations. May all the gods of heaven and earth appear before thee with gifts and offerings. May the kings of the countries bring to thee heavy tribute. May men stand before thee daily with sacrifices, prayers, and adorations. To Uruk, thy city, do thou show abundant favor. O great God Anu, avenge thy city and hostile lands." Even though he was eventually prayed to less and less directly, he was still considered the power behind the power of the gods. Offerings continued to be brought to his temple at Uruk long after he was no longer associated closely with the daily lives of the people. Scholar Stephen Bertman writes, Anu was the august and revered chairman of the board of the Mesopotamian pantheon. His name literally meant heaven. He was the supreme source of authority among the gods and among men upon whom he conferred kingship. As heaven's grand patriarch, he dispensed justice and controlled the laws known as the Meh that governed the universe. When the Assyrian Empire fell in 612 BCE, many of the Mesopotamian gods associated with their rule were abandoned. The Assyrians had taken characteristics of many different gods for their own. The best example of this is their great god Ashur, and those who felt they'd suffered under Assyrian rule vent their frustration and vengeance on Assyrian cities, temples, and the statues of the gods. Some gods continued to be acknowledged, however, and Anu was among these. Worship of Anu continued into the Hellenistic period of Mesopotamian history, and throughout his association with Marduk, on up to circa 141 BCE, when the Parthians controlled the region. As the father of the gods, Anu holds a key role in the mythology and its effects on literature and beliefs that followed. Records of Anu date back to at least 3000 BC, making him one of the oldest of the gods. Anu came to be regarded as the father and king of the gods. Anu is so prominently associated with the city of Erech in southern Babylonia that there are good reasons for believing this place to have been the original seat of the Anu cult. If this be correct, then the goddess Nana or Ishtar of Erech was presumably regarded as his consort. The purely theoretical character of Anu is thus still further emphasized, and in the annals and votive inscriptions, as well as the incantations and hymns, he's rarely introduced as an active force to whom a personal appeal can be made. His name becomes little more than a synonym for the heavens in general, and even his title as king or father of the gods has lost a little of the personal element in it.